Do you want to know the guaranteed way to lose a reader? Because if you don't know it, people are going to be closing the book, not finishing it, and more, not buying your next book. There are a few mistakes that I see in new writers all the time. And believe me, I was a new writer once too, and I've made all these same mistakes. But this video is going to walk you through exactly how to avoid those mistakes. And if you've already made them, how to fix them. Because you want readers to love your book. You work so hard on it. You maybe dreamed of being a writer your whole life, and you're dying to put this story together. Let's give that story the best possible first chance by talking about the things that could make it fail and then how to make it succeed. And the last one is one that I think a lot of people don't think about, but definitely need to pay attention to. The number one problem you could be having is slow pacing. Pacing is like the gait of your book. You know, like when you're running, you either run really fast, you run really slow, or you kind of run super, super slow like me. I don't want that to happen in my book. I want my book to have a nice pacing. That doesn't mean it should be paced the same way throughout the whole book, and I'll talk about why in a second. What that means is that the reader needs to be excited to turn the pages. I was just reading a book last night that I could not put down, and I was up till 1 in the morning because it was paced really well and I couldn't wait to find out what happened next. I love it when a book does that to me. You want your book to do the same thing to your reader. Slow pacing happens when you have too much narrative, and narrative is basically telling the reader what's there, describing things or recalling a memory. I want you to think about your narrative like that super boring neighbor who goes on and on and on about his childhood in Wisconsin, how he makes his own beer, or whatever it is that you don't care about and you don't want to hear about because it has nothing to do with your life. It is the same thing in a book. When a character goes on and on and on and on describing something or thinking about something, if it has nothing to do with the plot, the reader doesn't care. Even if you have a moment where the character has to have a memory, try to do it in a scene where the character is being active and doing something else so that the memory is interspersed. Because in real life, we don't just sit there and think and think and think. We actually do stuff. Like maybe you're gardening and you're thinking about that fight with your husband, or you're cooking dinner and thinking about the worries that you have with your teenager. We're doing stuff while we think. So let your character do stuff. But the stuff your character does should have something to do with the plot. And if you're confused about plot, I did a whole lot of videos on that. I have a whole masterclass that covers it from start to finish, where you can learn a lot about plot. The second problem you could have is that your character is flat and uninteresting. Don't get me wrong. I bet you love your character. You thought this is going to be the best person to be the star of this story. I loved all my early characters too, even though they were terrible characters, and they were flat because they had no emotional depth. And I think that is probably the top mistake I see other writers making, is that they don't put the emotional depth in there. And you know why? Because putting emotional depth on the page with your character requires you to go emotionally deep inside yourself. And most of us don't really like doing that, right? Like really kind of touching on those anxieties, fears, insecurities, traumas that all reside within us. But here's the thing, that's where the best, absolute best writing comes from, is when you can really tap into those feelings that you and other people have in common. Make them go through the emotional roller coaster that you and I do every single day, because that is what makes them real. That is what makes them the kind of characters that people are like, oh, I felt like that character was right in the room with me. It's that humanness that you have as the writer that you need to get on the page. The third mistake you might be making is weak writing. And that's when you're telling a lot and not showing. And that was, trust me, a really hard concept for me to get. I thought, well, I have to tell the reader that this character is nosy, or I have to tell the reader that this character is cold. No, you don't. Because the whole goal of a book is for the reader to lose themselves in their imagination. You want them to just kind of get so absorbed in the details and in the mood that they can imagine it all happening. And the way you do that is by painting a picture with really strong adjectives and nouns and verbs. Everybody knows that the sky is blue, but when you say cornflower blue, that paints a different picture than robin's egg blue or sapphire. All of those are different blues. By using that exact word, you can get an even better picture for the reader. Here's a key though with that, and this is something that's super important. Only describe the things that are impactful to the story and that are triggered for that particular character at that particular moment. So if you start to describe something, ask yourself, am I describing this because I want to describe it, or am I describing it because this is actually something important to the character and to the plot? The fourth problem is boring openings. And I blame high school English and my college degree in English for this problem. because we were taught to kind of go with what Dickens and Shakespeare and all of those people kind of did way back when. Because when those people wrote books, there was nothing else really vying for our attention, and so they could take their time to kind of ease into the story. We don't have that kind of time nowadays. People are boom, 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 moving on to the next thing. So it has to really grab the reader's attention from the first page. If your opening goes on way too long, describing the weather or the location or having the character just on a long walking journey where they're just thinking, that's going to lose your reader because it's boring. You don't have to throw a car chase or a murder on the first page, but you have to have some kind of trouble, a catalyst for everything that goes into motion with this character. Because a book is about a moment of change in the character's life. The last problem is one that requires an understanding of how plots work. So plot is like a jigsaw puzzle, and you got all these pieces that you got to put together. But you got to put them together in the right order in order for the jigsaw puzzle to work. But they also have to make the reader more and more and more and more worried every single page that things are going to work out. Because when the book starts with that trouble, the reader is immediately thinking, okay, is this going to work out? Is Lassie going to find Timmy in the well? Is E.T. going to get home? But then you have to have things get progressively worse for the character. It's kind of like when you're watching a Friday the 13th movie and you can see Jason coming down the hallway and the unsuspecting sorority girl is just sitting there on her phone, not even paying attention. And you have that tension of like, honey, wake up, turn around, look, Jason's right there. That's the kind of mood you want to create in your book. You don't have to put a serial killer in there, but you can indeed create that kind of tension by doing this one thing. So when you get to the end of the scene with your character, something has to happen to make things worse. And when things get worse, the character needs to make a new decision to solve this new problem. By doing this, you will create rising stakes. So when you start off with a bang and you get your character going on their journey and you start putting in some emotional layers and you give them something that is worth achieving, you're going to create a book that readers cannot put down. These are the kinds of questions that come up in our writing sprints on Fridays, but they're also questions that I've answered in videos like this one, where I talk about how to create a really powerful first chapter. When you do that, you've got somebody that's going to read that book from beginning to end because they are so hooked. They can't wait to figure out how it's going to end.